Sagittarius. The soul tie has been cut, but they still feel you. When the soul has released but the energy remains. Sagittarius, you have let go of someone who no longer belongs on your path. Not because the love vanished, not because the memories lost their sweetness, but because you finally understood loving someone does not always mean holding on to them. You released that invisible cord in the quiet of your own spirit, without drama, without the need for an audience. You didn't slam a door. You simply stopped standing in it. Yet somewhere, on a frequency you no longer visit, they still feel you. Your absence has become a presence of its own. A weight, a reminder, a haunting in the most unexpected corners of their days. Every step you take further from them sharpens the outline of the space you once filled. It is a space they can't replace because it was never just physical. It was the way your energy wrapped around their life, softening its edges, making the air lighter to breathe. You are learning now that letting go is not the end. It is a return to your own center, to your own pulse, to the part of you that knows how to exist without being anchored to another. And though they still feel you, that feeling is no longer an open door. It is the echo of what once was, fading not because it lacked meaning, but because you have stepped fully into your own. If this resonates with you, stay with me. Walk through the deeper layers of this story. Like, share, subscribe. Not for the sake of numbers, but to keep this connection alive between your heart and the truths that quietly set it free. Gate 1. The cord is gone, but the echo remains. Some connections, Sagittarius, are written in a place beyond time. You don't meet them with your eyes first. You meet them with your soul. Long before your mind had language for it, you felt them. Before you understood why, you were already tethered. Like two lanterns lit from the same flame. They became a mirror you didn't expect to find. One that reflected not only the beauty you carried, but also the cracks you tried to ignore. You, in turn, were their mirror too. For a while it felt like home. Not because everything was easy, it wasn't, but because the connection was deep enough to touch parts of you no one else had reached. You could feel them without being told. Sense their joy in the curve of their voice. Sense their sorrow in the stillness between words. You thought that kind of bond would outlast anything. But bonds, no matter how spiritual, are not immune to the erosion of mismatched frequencies. The day came when you had to choose. Keep pouring yourself into something that left you bleeding slowly, or pull back to protect the integrity of your spirit. It wasn't an impulsive decision. You had been feeling the strain for a long time, the way your energy had to stretch itself thin to keep the connection alive, the way you were bending to meet them where they were while your own soul called you somewhere higher. And so, you cut the cord. It wasn't with malice, and it wasn't in rage. You didn't set fire to the bridge. You simply stopped crossing it. It was the quiet kind of ending, the one that doesn't get written about in songs, the one without slam doors or grand speeches. The kind where you keep walking, and before you realize it, the thread between you has thinned until it is no more. But here's the part people don't talk about. Even when the cord is gone, the echo remains. On some nights, without warning, they dream of you. In the middle of their day, a song you once loved plays, and it's as if you're in the room for a moment. They might be talking with someone else, but a phrase you used to say slips into their mind like a whisper. They feel your absence in the way one feels the sudden weightlessness after a bird leaves a branch. The branch is still there, but something essential has gone. They don't understand why they still feel you. And maybe you don't understand it fully either. But that is the nature of certain soul ties. The body can walk away, the mind can decide it's over, but the energy lingers like perfume on an empty shirt. I think of a man named Julian, who once told me about the woman he loved when he was younger. They parted not in anger but because life was pulling them in different directions. Years later, he was engaged to someone else, living in another city, yet he still felt her presence at the strangest times. It wasn't longing, not exactly, it was awareness. She would drift into his mind like a familiar melody, one he hadn't heard in years but could still hum perfectly. Sagittarius, when you let go of this person, you did so because you valued your wholeness over the comfort of a bond that no longer nourished you. That choice is sacred, but don't be surprised that they still feel you. The way you were present in their life was not ordinary, it was soul deep. You weren't just another person passing through. You were a part of their inner architecture. When you removed yourself, the structure shifted. The echo they feel is not just about missing you. It's about missing the stability, the light, the quiet strength you carried into their world. They might search for it in others, They might try to recreate it, but the frequency was unique to you, and there's no shortcut to replacing it. Here is your lesson. Not every connection that touches your soul is meant to last forever. Some come to awaken a dormant part of you, or of them, and then leave so the awakening can take root. The depth of a bond doesn't guarantee its permanence, and releasing it doesn't make it less real. You didn't fail because the tie didn't last. In truth, you honored it by letting it go when holding on would have turned love into erosion. The cord is gone, yes, but the echo? It's simply proof that something extraordinary once lived between you. Gate 2, you pulled your energy back and they began to see the void. When you were still in their life, Sagittarius, you didn't just show up in obvious ways. Your presence was subtle, steady, and woven into the spaces between things. Maybe it was the way you checked in without them having to ask. Maybe it was how you could read the heaviness in their voice even when they said they were fine. Maybe it was the warmth of your silent prayers for their well-being. The energy you sent without a word. The way you thought of them when you saw something beautiful and wished they could see it too. They may have thought these things were small, but small doesn't mean insignificant. Small is often the thread that holds the entire fabric together. And for a long time they wore that fabric without realizing it was you who wove it. When you finally began pulling your energy back, you didn't do it to punish them. You did it because you had to. You had been pouring from a well that was running dry, offering your light to someone who had grown used to it as if it were sunlight. Always there, always free, always unending. But even sunlight fades when the season changes. At first, they may not have noticed. They may have thought you were just busy or distracted, or going through something you didn't want to share. But over time, the absence became too sharp to ignore. They reached for you in the ways they always had. A late-night text, a casual comment meant to draw you out, and you weren't there in the same way anymore. The conversations that once flowed easily now felt thin. The laughter that used to rise between you like sparks in a fire no longer caught. It wasn't that you stopped caring. It was that you stopped giving your energy away where it was not cherished. You began choosing yourself, and in doing so, you removed the unspoken safety net they had always taken for granted. And here's the thing about energy. When it's present, it feels invisible, like the air we breathe. But when it's gone, the air feels heavy. You notice the emptiness. You notice the quiet. You notice that the light in the room has shifted, and no amount of artificial brightness can replicate it. I once knew a man named Rami, who had a friend that was his anchor during the most turbulent years of his life. She was the one who remembered the details, who celebrated his smallest wins, who sensed when his silences meant something was wrong. Over time, he grew so accustomed to her care that he forgot it wasn't guaranteed. When she finally stepped back, not with anger but with a soft, permanent withdrawal, he was startled by how stark the world felt. He didn't just miss her. He missed the way life felt lighter when she was around. And for the first time, he realized that what she gave him wasn't just affection, it was stability, and it had shaped the person he was during those years. Sagittarius, that's what's happening now for the person you've released. They are beginning to realize what your presence truly meant. Not the grand gestures or the visible moments, those were easy to remember. It's the undercurrent they miss. The calm you brought into chaos, the encouragement you slipped into casual words, the way they felt more at home in themselves when you were near. They're learning, perhaps for the first time, that what you offered wasn't something that could be found just anywhere. It was an energy uniquely yours. And when that energy is gone, what's left is a space that feels too vast, too cold, too hollow. This is the lesson. The light you carried didn't just illuminate you, it illuminated them. And while you were there, that light made it easier for them to avoid the darker corners of themselves. Now without you, those shadows have nowhere to hide. And maybe that's part of the gift too, though they won't see it that way at first. Your absence is not a cruelty. It is a mirror. It shows them what was always theirs to face long before you came along. You are not responsible for how they fill that void. You are not required to step back in just because they now see what you brought. Your only responsibility is to honor your own energy, to keep it where it is cherished, respected, and met with equal light. Because the truth is, you never really stopped giving. You simply started giving back to yourself. And that choice will shape the rest of your journey far more than their recognition ever could. Gate 3. What they carry is not just you but who they were with you. Here's the thing most people don't understand about memory, Sagittarius. When someone misses you, they're not always missing you in the way you think. More often than not, they are missing the version of themselves that existed in your presence. And for the one you've released, that version was rare. When they were with you, something in them softened. Maybe they laughed more freely, without scanning the room to see who was watching. Maybe they spoke their truth with less fear, because you never used their vulnerability against them. Maybe they let parts of themselves breathe that had been locked away for years. You didn't demand those parts. You simply created a space where they could surface without shame. And that's the thing. You weren't just someone they cared about. You were the environment where they remembered they could be more alive. They may not have told you this outright, but you could feel it in the way their energy shifted when you were around. They were lighter, more open, more human. But when you stepped back, they didn't just lose you, they lost access to that part of themselves. The conversations that made them feel brave don't happen anymore. The moments where they felt truly seen are harder to find. The safe place that existed between your two souls is gone, and without it, they are left staring at the walls they had built before you arrived. It's an ache they can't quite name because it's not as simple as, I miss you. It's I miss who I was when you were here. I think of a woman named Celine, who once told me about a friend she lost touch with. They had been inseparable for years, not romantically, but soulfully. This friend made her feel like she could walk into any room and belong. When life pulled them apart, she thought she missed the friend. But over time she realized she missed the way she herself had been in those years. Unafraid, spontaneous, creative. The friend had been the catalyst, the mirror, the space where those parts of her could flourish. Without that space, she struggled to find those parts again. Sagittarius, this is what you have been for them. You didn't just fill their life with love or companionship. You reflected back to them a version of themselves they had forgotten. A truer, brighter, freer self. You reminded them of what it felt like to be seen without needing to perform, to be valued without having to earn it. And because that's rare, losing it feels like losing oxygen. Here's the truth that's hard to swallow. You can't be that mirror for them anymore. Not because they don't need it, but because it's not your role to hold that space indefinitely. You came into their life to awaken something, not to be the eternal guardian of it. The real work was always theirs to do, to keep that part of themselves alive without depending on your reflection. This is the deeper lesson. Soul connections are not just about companionship. They are catalysts. They shake us awake. They pull forgotten truths from the corners of our spirit and place them right in our hands. But catalysts don't always stay. Sometimes their role is to ignite the flame and then step away, trusting that the other person will learn to tend it themselves. And maybe that's why they still feel you so strongly, because it's not just you they're feeling. It's the echo of themselves as they were with you. It's the memory of being more alive, more honest, more aligned. And until they learn to access that without you, your absence will keep stirring something in them they can't quite quiet. You can have compassion for that without stepping back into the role. You can care without returning. Because the truth is, your journey now is about embodying that same freedom for yourself, without pouring all your light into someone else's cup. They may remember you for the rest of their life. Not because they can't move on, but because some connections change you so completely that you can never go back to who you were before them. And you, Sagittarius, were that change for them. Gate 4. The invisible presence remains, but you are now the center of your own energy. They still feel you, Sagittarius, even now. Not in the way they could before, where a message or a glance could bridge the distance instantly, but in the quieter, more haunting ways. You arrive in their dreams without warning, wearing the same smile they used to see when life felt safe. A song on the radio will pull them back to a moment with you so vividly that it makes them pause in the middle of whatever they were doing. Sometimes they feel you in the way the air shifts, as if the memory of you is stitched into the wind itself. But the difference is this: they can feel you, but they can no longer reach you. That's because you've moved to a different frequency. One where your energy no longer seeks outward for connection, but rests inward, fully rooted in yourself. Before, you may have sent signals without even realizing it, the kind of unspoken invitations that let someone know your door is still ajar. Now that door isn't shut out of bitterness. It simply doesn't exist in the same place anymore. You've relocated your center and they don't have the map. This shift is not an act of punishment. It's an act of self-devotion. You've learned that your energy is not an endless resource for others to draw from freely. It's something sacred, something to be channeled toward the places and people that nourish you in return. You've become the keeper of your own flame, not to guard it selfishly, but to ensure it burns steadily enough to light the life you are building. And here's the paradox. The very thing they now ache for is the thing they once had constant access to. The warmth of your understanding, the steady glow of your presence, the unspoken reassurance that you would still be there tomorrow. When they reach for it now, their hands close on air. Not because you've become cold, but because you no longer exist on the same wavelength. I think of a woman named Amara who once loved someone so deeply that her whole life orbited around them. She was always available, always giving, always pouring into their world. When she finally stepped away, after years of being taken for granted, she didn't stop loving. She simply turned all that energy inward, tending to her own dreams, her own joy. Years later, that person told her they could still feel her, but it wasn't the same. She just smiled and said, "Of course it's not the same. I'm not standing in the same place anymore." That's what you've done, Sagittarius. You've shifted the axis. You've stopped sending out lifelines to keep a bond alive. Instead, you've anchored yourself in your own center, radiating without chasing. And this is where the true transformation lies. Your light shines brighter now, not because you're trying to be seen, but because it's finally shining for you. They will feel that, not as warmth they can step into, but as a glow on the horizon they can't reach. And in that unreachable distance, they will remember your words, your laugh, the way you once looked at them and saw through the noise straight into their soul. They will understand things they couldn't before. But by the time those realizations arrive, they will also realize the most important truth. You are no longer there. And maybe that's the lesson they were meant to learn, that your value was never in your constant presence, but in the rare frequency you carried. A frequency they can't duplicate, can't imitate, can't replace. A frequency that now belongs entirely to you. Sagittarius, you have become your own anchor, your own safe place, your own greatest source of light. And while they may still feel you in fleeting, intangible ways, the reality is this. You are no longer living in their orbit. You've built your own universe, and it is vast, luminous, and whole without them. Conclusion, you left quietly, and that is greatness. Sagittarius, you didn't leave in a storm. There were no slammed doors, no final words thrown like stones. You didn't disappear to prove a point or to make them chase you. You simply stepped out of a map that no longer matched your soul. And that is power. The world often mistakes strength for noise. But true strength, the kind that changes the trajectory of your life, often happens in silence. It's the moment you realize you don't need to be understood in order to move forward. It's the moment you stop bleeding into a connection that no longer holds you. It's the moment you choose peace over proof. They may never know the exact day it happened, the day you finally loosened your grip on the invisible cord and let it fall. They may not realize that your leaving was not about anger, but about alignment. But somewhere, in a part of themselves they don't talk about, they feel it. They feel you gone, not just physically, but in the way the air feels different when they walk into a room alone. They feel it in the stillness of nights that used to carry your voice. And perhaps they dream of you sometimes or wonder if you ever think of them. But the truth is, your thoughts are no longer stuck in their orbit. Your energy is no longer leaking into places that drain you. You are building something new now. A life that is fuller, steadier, and entirely your own. This is the quiet magnificence of letting go. You don't need to see their reckoning. You don't need to know how they're filling the space you left behind. The only thing that matters is that you've returned to yourself. That the love you once gave so freely to them is now flowing inward, nourishing the roots of the person you are becoming. And that, Sagittarius, is the kind of ending that isn't really an ending at all. It's the beginning of your most radiant chapter yet.